Chapter 1: The Last Transmission. The towering pines of Blackwood Forest stretched endlessly into the darkening sky, their skeletal branches swaying as the wind carried a whisper through the trees. Ethan adjusted the camera strapped to his shoulder and exhaled, his breath curling into mist. "All right, team," he said, scanning his three companions, Lisa, Jake, and Sophia. "We're officially at Ground Zero, the last known location of Robert Hale." Lisa, the researcher of the group, unfolded a wrinkled map. He was camping about 100 yards from here. His gear was intact, but he was gone. No tracks, no signs of struggle. "Except for the radio," Jake added, setting his backpack down with a thud. Ethan nodded. The only clue left behind was a strange radio transmission, distorted, barely coherent, but undeniably chilling. He pressed play on his phone, letting the crackling audio fill the cold air. "It watches, it whispers, it wears our faces." The words were barely more than a breath, yet they sent a shudder through the group. Lisa hugged herself. Creepy as hell, but it could have been interference, right? Sophia, ever the skeptic, shrugged. "Could have been, or just a sick prank." Jake scoffed. "Then why hasn't anyone found Hale? Why is this place off limits?" No one answered. The forest around them felt too still, as if waiting for something. They worked in silence, setting up camp as the last traces of daylight faded behind the treetops. Lisa checked her recorder, testing for electronic interference. "So," she began, keeping her tone casual, "the legend goes that a faceless entity mimics its victims, making them disappear. But the weirdest part, people forget they ever existed." Sophia rolled her eyes. "Urban legend nonsense." Lisa frowned. "Tell that to the families of the missing." Jake flicked on his flashlight and scanned the trees. The light wavered as shadows stretched unnaturally long. "What do they say about stopping it?" he asked. Lisa hesitated. "Some say if you catch it mimicking you, you can stop it, like looking into a mirror. But no one really knows." Ethan was about to respond when a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Everyone froze. Jake swept his flashlight toward the sound. Nothing, just trees swaying in the wind. Sophia let out a breathy laugh. "Jesus, we're jumping at twigs now." Lisa turned back to the radio and twisted the knob. The static-filled hum buzzed softly. "It's probably nothing," she muttered, lowering the volume. The sound changed. The voice was still speaking, but the radio was off. A slow, creeping silence swallowed the group. Lisa stared at the lifeless device in her hands, her fingers trembling. "Tell me someone else just heard that." No one moved. Then the whisper returned, closer this time. "It watches." The wind died. The trees stood still, and from the darkness beyond their camp, something shifted. A faint rustling just beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. Ethan swallowed hard. "Who's there?" No answer. Jake took a slow step forward, his grip tightening around his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but the twisted trunks of the trees. But something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like the moment before a storm. Then Sophia gasped. "Guys, look at the trees." The others turned. There, carved into the bark of the nearest tree, was a fresh set of words. "It wears our faces." The group stared in stunned silence. No one had been near that tree. Lisa's breathing grew unsteady. "Okay, screw this. We need to go back to the van." Ethan hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to agree, but something gnawed at the back of his mind. He glanced at the camera, still recording on his shoulder. This was what they came for. Proof. "We can't leave yet," he said, trying to sound calm. "We need to document everything." Jake shook his head. "Are you serious? That wasn't here a minute ago." "Exactly," Ethan countered. "And if it's real, we need to know." Sophia opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. A soft crunch echoed from the darkness. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. Jake spun, flashlight trembling in his grip. "Who's there? Show yourself." Nothing, just the trees, silent and unmoving. Then, a low, distorted whisper slithered through the air. "It watches." The voice was impossibly close, as if someone were standing just inches away. Lisa let out a shaky breath. "Guys, we need to go, now." No one argued this time. Grabbing their gear, they turned and hurried back toward the trailhead, hearts hammering. The forest seemed to press in around them, the trees stretching taller, darker. Every shadow felt alive. But as they reached the edge of the clearing, Ethan stopped cold. "Wait." Lisa turned, breathless. "What?" Ethan's face had gone pale. He lifted his flashlight, shining it on the trees ahead. Their footprints in the dirt, the ones they had just made, were already gone. The ground was smooth, untouched, as if they had never been there. Chapter 2. The first encounter. The hike back to camp was silent, except for the occasional snap of twigs beneath hurried footsteps. The cold was seeping in faster now, turning their breath into pale wisps. Lisa clutched her radio tight, as if it might start whispering again at any moment. They reached their campsite, but something felt off. The fire they had set earlier had nearly died, the embers dimmer than they should have been. The wind had stopped completely, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. Ethan glanced around, his grip tightening on his camera. Did anyone else notice the temperature drop? Sophia rubbed her arms. Yeah, like 10 degrees colder than before. Jake cursed under his breath as he fumbled for the firewood. "Let's just get this thing burning again. I'm not freezing to death on top of whatever the hell is going on out here." Lisa moved to her tent, but then she stopped. Something was different. She knelt down and ran her fingers over the dirt near her tent. Their footprints from earlier were still there, but now there were more. A second set of tracks. They were faint but unmistakable, long, narrow impressions in the soil, as if something had walked beside them on their way in. Lisa's breath hitched. "Guys," she whispered, "look at this." The others gathered around. "Those aren't ours," Jake muttered, shifting uneasily. Ethan frowned. "But they follow our path exactly." Sophia shivered, like something was with us. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lisa, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, forced a laugh. "All right, let's be rational. Could be animal tracks, right?" Jake knelt beside her, running his fingers through the dirt. "Then what animal has human-sized feet and walks perfectly in step with us?" Silence. Lisa opened her mouth to argue, but a sound cut her off. A snap. Not from inside the camp, from the tree line. Everyone turned. The trees loomed ahead, their shadows thick and endless. The fire crackled behind them, but it felt like the only warmth in an otherwise frozen void. Ethan raised his flashlight and aimed it toward the noise. The beam sliced through the dark, illuminating twisted roots and uneven earth. Nothing. Then, just as he was about to lower the light, a flash of movement. Something tall, something pale. It was gone before before he could fully register what he had seen. His stomach dropped. Did anyone? I saw it. Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. Jake gritted his teeth. Okay, what exactly did we just see? Ethan shook his head. I don't know, but I got it on camera. He quickly checked his footage, scrolling back to the moment his light had hit. Whatever it was, static. The second the flashlight had landed on the figure, the camera had glitched. The video was warped, lines of interference running across the screen. Ethan clenched his jaw. It's like the camera couldn't process it. Sophia was staring at the trees, her face pale. I don't like this. Lisa swallowed hard. Neither do I. Another snap. This time it was closer. Ethan aimed the flashlight again. The trees stood still, unmoving, but something was wrong. The shadows didn't look right. Too long, too stretched, like something was standing just outside the light's reach. A whisper carried on the wind. Not words, just the shape of them. A breath without a voice. Lisa stepped back. We need to go inside the tents. Ethan hesitated. His instincts told him that whatever was out there wasn't leaving. But they had no weapons, no way to fight whatever this was. Reluctantly, he nodded. All right, everyone stay in pairs. No one goes anywhere alone. They hurried to their tents, zipping them tight. But even as Ethan lay down, staring at the thin fabric separating them from the dark, one thought kept repeating in his head. Whatever had walked beside them, whatever had been watching from the trees, it wasn't gone. It was waiting. Chapter 3. The Thing in the Dark. The tents felt like paper-thin walls between them and whatever lurked beyond the tree line. Inside, Ethan lay on his back, staring at the ceiling of nylon fabric above him. The others were silent, but he knew none of them were asleep. The air was too tense, too heavy with the weight of what they had just seen. A shape, a figure, something too fast, too unnatural. The whispering wind had died completely. The silence was suffocating. Then, a sound. Faint at first, barely noticeable. A slow, deliberate shuffling through the leaves. Ethan held his breath. The footsteps weren't coming from just one direction. They were circling the tents. Lisa and Sophia were in the tent next to his. He could hear Lisa's shaky breathing, her fear pressing through the thin material. Jake was beside him, rigid as a corpse, listening. Ethan reached for his camera. The red recording light blinked in the dark. He hadn't stopped filming. Shh. The whisper slithered through the air. A breath just outside the tent. Jake turned his head sharply toward Ethan, mouthing, "Do you hear that?" Ethan nodded, his pulse hammering. Then something pressed against the tent wall. The fabric indented, stretching inward as if someone was pushing from the outside. A shape distorted, its form shifting. Jake's eyes widened. The pressure lingered for a second, then vanished. A pause. Then Lisa screamed. Ethan bolted upright as Lisa's tent shook violently. The zipper rattled. Sophia's voice was panicked. "Something's outside." Ethan lunged for the tent flap, yanking it open. Cold night air rushed in, biting against his skin. Lisa and Sophia's tent was moving. Something was pushing against it from all sides. The fabric bulged and warped, shifting unnaturally as if unseen hands were dragging their fingers along the surface. Jake scrambled out after Ethan. "Hey, get away from them." The movement stopped. The tent fell still. Silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, cautiously, Lisa unzipped the entrance and peered out, her face pale with terror. Ethan aimed his flashlight toward the trees. The forest stared back, quiet and unmoving. "Did you see it?" Sophia gasped, crawling out of the tent. "Did you see what it was?" Jake clenched his fists. "No, but it was here." Lisa was trembling. "I heard it breathing." Ethan swept the flashlight around again, scanning the tree line. Shadows twisted under the beam's glare, but nothing moved. Still, the uneasy feeling in his gut remained. Then he noticed something. "The footprints," he muttered. The others followed his gaze. All around the tents, the dirt had been disturbed. Footprints, but not their own. Long, narrow imprints trailed through the campsite, circling the tents, then stopping abruptly, as if whatever had been there had vanished into thin air. Jake swallowed hard. "That's not possible." Lisa was gripping her arms as if trying to keep herself together. What does it want?" Ethan didn't have an answer. Sophia turned toward the radio sitting on a nearby log. It was silent. Then, a click. The radio turned on by itself. Static filled the air, low and crackling. Jake took a slow step back. Nope, screw this. I am not doing this haunted forest bullshit." Then the static cut out, and a voice, distorted, warping in and out, barely human, spoke. "It watches." Lisa covered her mouth, muffling a gasp. "It whispers." Sophia grabbed Ethan's arm. "Turn it off." Ethan reached forward. His fingers barely brushed the dial when the voice changed. It deepened. It mimicked them. "Did you see what it was?" The words were spoken in Sophia's own voice. The group froze. "I heard it breathing." Lisa's voice, perfect and exact, but Lisa's lips never moved. Jake's face paled. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" Ethan slammed the dial. The radio snapped off. Silence. They all stood there, staring at the lifeless radio as their breath clouded in the freezing air. Then Jake took a slow, shaky step back. "We're leaving. First light. No arguments." No one disagreed. Ethan clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. He had spent years chasing urban legends, tracking down ghost stories, proving myths wrong. But this wasn't a story. This was real, and something out there knew their voices. Chapter 4. The Reflection. That wasn't the hours stretched unbearably long. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the trees, every shift of the wind sent jolts of terror through the group. No one dared speak, afraid that the silence itself was the only thing keeping it from returning. Ethan sat by the smoldering fire, his fingers gripping his camera as if it were a lifeline. The footage he'd recorded was useless, glitching, distorted, warped beyond recognition. But the voices, the radio, it had spoken in their voices. Jake paced near the edge of the campsite, his flashlight trembling in his grip. "I swear to God, if the van doesn't start in the morning, I'm setting this whole damn forest on fire." Sophia, still shaking, hugged her knees. "It's toying with us. That's what these things do, right? They don't kill you right away. Her voice trailed off, as if finishing the sentence would make it real. Lisa remained silent. She had barely said a word since the radio incident, her face pale and drawn. Ethan exhaled and stood. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to come back. We need to check the van." Jake scoffed. "And what? Walk through that?" Who gestured toward the forest, now a solid wall of darkness. "You want to give that thing another chance to follow us?" Ethan knew he was right, but sitting still felt worse. Then Lisa finally spoke. "I need to check something first." They turned to her. She wasn't looking at them. Her eyes were locked onto something just outside the fire's glow. Her mirror. She had brought a small handheld mirror for her makeup, and now it sat on the ground, reflecting the dim firelight. Lisa swallowed. "I saw something in it earlier, when I was in the tent." Sophia furrowed her brows. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated, then bent down and picked up the mirror. She held it up so that she could see her reflection. Ethan noticed her hands were shaking. "I was checking my face after everything that happened," she whispered, "and I saw my reflection blink." Jake frowned, and Lisa turned to them, her expression haunted. "I wasn't blinking." A chill settled over the group. Sophia stiffened. "You're saying..." Lisa swallowed hard. "I think it can mimic more than just our voices." No one moved. Then Ethan took a step forward. "Let me see." Lisa hesitated, then reluctantly handed him the mirror. Ethan lifted it, angling it toward his face. The glass was slightly fogged from the cold. His own reflection stared back, eyes wide, lips tight, the exhaustion heavy on his features. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, his reflection smiled, but Ethan hadn't. The smile was slow, unnatural, stretching his lips too far. The teeth were just slightly wrong. Too many. He nearly dropped the mirror. Lisa gasped. "You saw it?" Sophia pressed a hand over her mouth. "Oh my God." Jake snatched the mirror from Ethan's hands and turned it toward himself. His reflection stared back. No movement, no wrongness, just his own tired, scared face. Jake exhaled. "Okay, that's..." His reflection blinked. Jake hadn't. The mirror shattered against the ground as he threw it down with a curse. Silence. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Lisa whispered, "It's watching us." Ethan's breath came fast, uneven. "No, it's worse than that." Sophia looked up, eyes wide. "It's becoming us." A gust of wind tore through the clearing, scattering ashes from the fire. The trees groaned under its force, as if something massive was shifting between them. Then, just beyond the tree line, a shape, a figure stood there, barely visible between the trunks. Not an animal, not human, but almost. The shadows clung to it, obscuring details, but they could see its outline. Tall, thin, its limbs just slightly too long. And its face. It had no face. Yet somehow, they all knew it was staring right at them. Lisa let out a broken sound, something between a gasp and a sob. The figure twitched, then it moved, fast, straight toward them. Chapter 5. The thing that wore their faces. The moment it moved, instinct took over. "Run!" Ethan shouted. Lisa was the first to react, scrambling backward toward the tents, her breath ragged with terror. Sophia followed, barely managing to grab her flashlight before sprinting after her. Jake stood frozen for half a second too long, his body caught between fight and flight. Then the thing let out a sound, a warped, distorted echo of their own voices, and he bolted. Ethan was the last to move, but his camera was still in his hand, still recording. As he turned, the lens caught a glimpse of the thing. It was changing, its featureless face twisted, trying to form something. Then, in an instant, it had Lisa's face, but it wasn't perfect. The skin was stretched too tight, the eyes too large, the mouth smiling. Lisa saw it too. She let out a strangled scream. "No, that's not me." The thing lurched forward. They sprinted toward the tents, but there was nowhere to go. No walls, no doors. Nothing between them and whatever had crawled out of the forest. Jake skidded beyond the trees, at least 100 yards away. A straight shot through the clearing, but between them and it, the thing stood there. Except now it wasn't alone. More figures stood in the darkness beyond the firelight, distorted, shifting. Each of them had someone's face. Lisa, Jake, Sophia, Ethan. One of them had his face, but its mouth was open too wide, too deep, a black void where teeth should be. Ethan felt his stomach drop. They're copying us. Sophia was shaking. Oh my God. Lisa grabbed Ethan's arm. We can't stay here. We have to go now. Jake didn't wait for an argument. He grabbed the emergency flare from his bag, yanked off the cap, and struck it against the rock beside him. Whoosh! Red light exploded into the darkness. For the first time, they saw them clearly. The creatures, the copies, flinched at the sudden burst of brightness. Their skin looked almost human, but not quite, like wax figures melting under heat. Their limbs were too long, their fingers stretched unnaturally, and their eyes were wrong, hollow, empty, as if they were still learning how to be human. Jake didn't hesitate. He threw the flare at the closest one. The thing recoiled with an ear-piercing screech, stumbling back into the shadows. That was all they needed. Go! They ran. The van was their only chance. Ethan sprinted beside Lisa, his camera bouncing against his chest. The cold night air burned his lungs, but he didn't stop. Behind them, the creatures followed, not running, gliding. The way they moved was unnatural, as if their limbs weren't quite working right yet. But they were fast. Jake reached the van first, yanking on the handle. Please, God. Unlocked. He threw open the door, practically shoving Sophia inside. Lisa scrambled in after her, gasping for breath. Ethan wasn't so lucky. Something grabbed his hoodie from behind. Cold fingers. Too long, too sharp. Dug into the fabric, yanking him backward. Lisa screamed. Ethan! He twisted, swinging the camera as hard as he could. The lens shattered against the thing's face. It didn't bleed. It just tilted its head, like it was confused. Ethan didn't wait. He tore free and lunged into the van. Jake was already in the driver's seat. Come on, come on, come on. The engine roared to life. For a split second, Ethan made the mistake of looking back. The creatures stood just outside the headlight's reach, watching. Their faces were still theirs, still almost human. And as the van peeled out onto the dirt road, tires kicking up dust and gravel, Ethan heard it. A whisper, faint, his own voice. We'll see you soon. Chapter 6. Nowhere is safe. The van tore down the forest road, tires kicking up dust and loose gravel. Inside, the air was thick with panicked breathing, the lingering echoes of what they had just seen still hanging over them. Ethan clutched his broken camera, his fingers white-knuckled against the plastic. Lisa had her hands pressed over her ears, whispering to herself, as if trying to block out the voice, their voice, that had whispered that final, terrifying message. Jake's hands were shaking on the wheel. Where the hell are we? This road, why does it feel longer? Sophia glanced at her phone. No signal, nothing. We're just driving in a straight line, right? We should have hit the highway by now. Ethan checked his own phone. Still nothing. He turned on the GPS, but the screen flickered, then glitched. The map warped, stretching unnaturally, the road looping back on itself. Lisa looked over his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. That's not possible. Sophia exhaled sharply. No, nope. I refuse to believe we're trapped in some Blair Witch time loop bullshit. It's just a dirt road. It leads somewhere. It has to. Jake pushed the gas pedal harder. The van jerked forward, speeding past the endless rows of trees. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but more road, twisting, stretching, leading nowhere. Then Ethan noticed something. The trees. The same dead, crooked tree with a hollowed-out trunk. They had passed it before. His stomach dropped. "Jake, I know." Jake's voice was tense, strained. "I know. We're going in circles." Lisa let out a quiet, broken sound. No, that's not." Then Sophia screamed. "The road!" Jake slammed the brakes. The van skidded, tires screeching against the dirt. Just ahead, standing in the middle of the road, a figure. Lisa's figure. But Lisa was inside the van. This thing, it was wearing her face. Ethan's breath hitched. Oh my God. It wasn't just standing there. It was smiling. Jake's grip tightened on the wheel. "Tell me I'm not seeing this." Sophia shook her head violently. No, that's not Lisa. That's one of them." The thing tilted its head. Then it moved, not toward them, but around them. It stepped to the left, slowly, deliberately, disappearing into the darkness. Lisa whispered, "It's not alone." Ethan turned. From the trees, more shapes emerged, their own reflections, distorted, wrong. A second Jake, a second Sophia, a second Ethan, and worst of all, they were getting closer. "Floor it!" Sophia shrieked. Jake didn't hesitate. The tires spun, the van jerking forward, barreling past where Lisa's doppelganger had stood just moments ago. The trees blurred past in a chaotic rush. No one spoke. No one could. Then Ethan saw it. Ahead, just barely visible in the distance. Lights. A gas station. A real, actual gas station. Lisa gasped. "Oh my God, go!" Jake sped toward it, the van roaring as it hit pavement. The man frowned. Then, slowly, his face changed. Not physically, but something in his expression. The way his mouth curved into a knowing smile. He wiped his hands on a rag and nodded toward the road. "Ah," he said. "That happens sometimes." Ethan felt ice in his veins. Lisa's voice was barely audible. "What do you mean?" The man took a step closer. "They let you go," he said simply. Sophia shuddered. "They?" The man didn't answer. Then, from inside the van, a voice, faint, soft, distorted. "We'll see you soon." The van's doors slammed shut on their own. Chapter 7. The van that wasn't theirs. The gas station lights flickered. A dull hum filled the air as the fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed, casting eerie artificial shadows across the pavement. No one moved. No one spoke. The van sat parked just feet away, its engine still warm, its metal frame reflecting the sickly yellow glow of the station lights. But something was inside, something that shouldn't be. Ethan's breath came in short, panicked bursts. He took an involuntary step back, his eyes locked on the van's windows. They were tinted, dark, impossible to see through. Lisa grabbed his wrist, her fingers ice cold. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. Jake turned to the gas station attendant, his voice shaking. "You said they let us go. What does that mean? What the hell is happening?" The attendant wiped his hands with his rag again, slower this time. His eyes flickered to the van, then back to them. "You made it out," he said, as if that was answer enough. Jake's fingers curled around the emergency flare in his jacket pocket, his knuckles turning white. "Tell me that was the wind." Ethan didn't answer. Sophia let out a small, strangled noise. She was staring at the van's rear window. Ethan followed her gaze. A shape stood inside. A figure. His figure. For a moment, all Ethan could do was stare. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. It was him, sitting in the back seat, face half hidden by the shadows, staring directly at him. Then, it smiled. Lisa grabbed his arm. We are not getting in that van. The attendant exhaled, rubbing his temples. You don't have a choice. Jake snapped his head toward him. Like hell we don't. We can call someone. The police. A tow truck. We'll walk if we have to. The man shook his head. Won't work. Sophia scoffed. Why not? The attendant's voice was tired. Because that's not your van anymore. Ethan felt his stomach drop. What? The man gestured toward the gas station lot. Check your license plate. No one wanted to move. No one wanted to get closer to it. But Jake did. Gritting his teeth, he inched forward until he was close enough to see the rear plate. He stared at it for a long moment, the color draining from his face. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. What does it say? Jake's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Finally, he forced out the words. It's wrong. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Jake staggered back as if the van itself had just breathed on him. It's not our plate, he said, voice barely above a whisper. The numbers, the letters, they're almost the same, but they're off, just slightly. Lisa's breathing became ragged, like how they copied our faces. Sophia's hands trembled, like how they copied our voices. Jake shook his head, backing away from the van. That's not our van. The gas station attendant nodded. It is now. Ethan turned to him sharply. What the hell does that mean? The man exhaled, tossing the rag over his shoulder. The real one's still out there, he said simply. Still waiting on the road, but you won't find it again. Sophia ran a hand through her hair, frustrated. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? The man pointed to the van. You drive it. Lisa let out a bitter, hollow laugh. You want us to get in a van that isn't ours, one that has copies of us inside. The attendant shrugged. You either take this one and leave, or you stay here. But if you stay, he glanced toward the darkened tree line. They'll come back for you. Silence. Ethan turned to his friends. They were all pale, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. No one wanted to get in, but no one wanted to stay either. Sophia was the first to move. She stepped toward the passenger door, every muscle in her body tense, as if expecting something to lunge at her. Nothing did. She gritted her teeth. I hate this. I hate this so much. One by one, they followed. Lisa slid into the back seat, avoiding the reflection in the window. Ethan got into the passenger seat. Jake hesitated at the driver's side door. His hands trembled. He glanced at the gas station attendant. What happens if we take it? The man met his gaze. You get to leave. Jake swallowed hard. Then, with a deep breath, he opened the door and got in. The keys were in the ignition, waiting. Ethan turned to look in the rearview mirror, and his reflection was already looking at him, not blinking, just smiling. Jake gripped the steering wheel. He turned to the attendant one last time. Will we be safe? The man didn't answer. He just smiled. The van's engine rumbled to life. Chapter 8. The Road That Never Ends. The van's engine rumbled like a growling beast. Jake's hands were clammy on the wheel, knuckles white as he forced himself to breathe. The gas station's neon glow flickered in the rearview mirror, growing smaller, dimmer. No one spoke. No one dared. Lisa sat curled up in the back, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her head resting against the window, but she wasn't looking outside. She didn't want to see what was out there. Sophia sat stiffly, staring straight ahead, gripping her seatbelt like it was the only thing keeping her from falling into some unseen abyss. Ethan exhaled shakily. His hands rested on his knees, but his mind was elsewhere, still stuck on what he saw in the mirror. His reflection, that smile. Jake focused on the road, forcing himself to ignore the heaviness in the van, the feeling that something was still watching. The road stretched ahead in an unbroken path, illuminated only by the weak glow of their headlights. It felt endless. No signs, no turns, just black asphalt swallowing everything. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time had begun to lose its grip on them. Then Sophia broke the silence. "Where are we?" Lisa let out a soft, shaky laugh. "We left the gas station, remember?" Sophia shook her head. "No, where are we? This highway, it's not the same one we were on before." Jake glanced at the odometer. The numbers ticked higher, but nothing changed outside. The road stretched infinitely, no other cars, no exits, no familiar landmarks. Ethan hesitated before checking his phone. No signal. Again, Lisa pulled out hers. "I swear to God if it still says..." She stopped. Sophia leaned over. "What?" Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. "My battery was at 50%. Now it's at 1. Ethan checked his own phone. His heart sank. The battery percentage. Frozen. Not going down. Not going up. Just stuck. Jake's grip tightened on the wheel. "We just need to keep driving. There has to be an exit somewhere." Ethan tried to stay calm. He turned to look through the back window, watching the road disappear into the void. Then his stomach dropped. The gas station, still there. Lisa turned, following his gaze. She gasped. "That's not possible." Sophia's voice cracked. "We've been driving for miles." Jake swerved. His hands trembled as he gritted his teeth, speeding up, eyes locked on the road ahead. But Ethan couldn't stop staring. The gas station, was it getting closer? His mouth was dry. "Guys, I think it's..." The van suddenly jerked. The lights flickered. The entire vehicle shuddered, as if something massive had grabbed hold of it. Then the radio turned on. No one had touched it. Static crackled through the speakers, loud, unnatural, whispering. A distorted voice, warping, shifting. Ethan's breath hitched. "Turn it off." Jake fumbled with the knob, twisting, clicking, but it wouldn't stop. The whispers grew louder. Lisa clamped her hands over her ears. "Make it stop." The voice on the radio changed. It wasn't just static anymore. It was them, their own voices, speaking, laughing, screaming. Sophia's head snapped toward the speakers. Then, clear as day, her own voice. "Don't look in the mirror." Her blood ran cold. The van lurched. The headlights flickered again. Lisa let out a small, broken sound. "We're not alone in here." The whispers stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a breath, not theirs, coming from the back seat. Lisa turned first and froze. A shape sat between her and Sophia. Not a reflection, not a shadow. Something else. Something wearing a face. Her face. But it was wrong. Its skin was too pale. Its mouth was too wide. And it was staring directly at her. Lisa's body locked up. She wanted to scream, but the sound died in her throat. Then it moved, slowly, tilting its head, grinning wider. Lisa gasped. The thing mouthed something, words she couldn't hear, but she knew what they meant. "You're in the wrong van." Then it lunged, Lisa screamed. The van veered. Jake lost control. The road vanished, and the world went black. Chapter 9. Nowhere to run. Darkness swallowed them whole. The van spun violently. Tires screeched against a road that wasn't there anymore. The entire vehicle tilted as if it were caught in a freefall, weightless and directionless. Lisa's scream died mid-throat. Sophia felt her body lift off the seat, gravity shifting in ways that didn't make sense. Up felt like down, side felt like forward, then impact. The van slammed into something solid, not pavement, not dirt, something soft but unmoving, like flesh. The moment the van stopped, there was silence. No engine, no radio, no whispers, just the sound of their own ragged, panicked breathing. Ethan's chest heaved. He could barely hear over the hammering of his own heartbeat. Jake's hands trembled on the wheel. "Is everyone okay?" No one answered. Lisa's fingers dug into the seat, nails pressing into the leather as she slowly turned her head. Too afraid to look, but too terrified not to. The windows were pitch black. No headlights, no outside world. Just an infinite void stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Sophia swallowed hard. Her voice was a whisper. "Where are we?" Ethan hesitated, forcing himself to turn and to look behind him. His stomach dropped. The back of the van was missing, not torn off, not broken, just gone. The back seats melted into the darkness. No hard edges, no visible line where the van ended and the blackness began. It was just erased. Lisa grabbed Ethan's wrist, her fingers cold as ice. "We have to get out of here." Jake unbuckled his seatbelt, shaking his head. "Out to where? There's nothing outside." Lisa's voice cracked. "We can't stay in here either." Jake turned to the others. "Maybe if we restart the van." Knock, knock, knock. They all froze. Lisa's breath hitched. The sound came from the roof. 3 deliberate, heavy knocks. Then, from the passenger side window, a single, pale hand. It pressed against the glass. Fingers too long, skin too smooth. No fingerprints, no wrinkles, just wrong. Lisa's nails dug into Ethan's arm. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The hand slid down the window, slow, deliberate, testing the surface. Sophia's fingers twitched toward the door handle. "We have to run." Ethan shook his head. "Run where?" Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. "Away from them." Then, the door unlocked. Click, not from the inside, not by anyone in the van. The locks disengaged on their own. Lisa's breath hitched. "They're opening the doors." Jake lunged forward, gripping the handle, trying to keep it shut. But he wasn't fast enough. The van's side door slid open. The void outside rippled. Shapes moved within it. Not people, not animals. Things that had never belonged in the world. They were waiting. Ethan turned toward the front windshield and saw himself, standing outside, staring back at him. But it wasn't him. The face was his, but the eyes were empty. The mouth too wide, the arms too long, and it smiled. Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. "Close the door." Lisa reached. The thing outside moved first. It grabbed her wrist. Lisa screamed. Ethan lunged, grabbing her other hand, trying to pull her back in. Her fingers slipped. The thing yanked. Lisa's body jerked forward. Sophia grabbed her waist. Jake grabbed her arm, but the creature didn't let go. Lisa's voice was high-pitched, raw with terror. "Don't let me go." The van shook violently. The figures outside closed in. Lisa's feet lifted off the floor. The thing pulled harder. Ethan clenched his teeth. digging his nails into her skin. Then, the door slammed shut by itself. Lisa collapsed onto the van floor, gasping for air. The van lurched forward, the headlights flickered back on, and suddenly, they were back on the road. The black void was gone. The forest returned. The highway stretched ahead once more, as if they had never left. Jake gripped the wheel, his breath ragged. What the hell just happened? Lisa sat shaking, her wrist burning where the thing had touched her. A bruise had already started forming. Dark, spreading, wrong. Ethan turned to the rearview mirror, and his reflection wasn't smiling anymore. It was watching, silent, waiting. Chapter 10. The Passenger. The van sped down the highway, but none of them felt safe. Lisa sat curled against the door, clutching her wrist. The bruise where the thing had grabbed her was getting darker, spreading in unnatural veins. She could still feel it, a lingering, icy pressure. Jake's hands were locked on the wheel, his knuckles white. He didn't dare slow down, didn't dare look back. Sophia wiped the sweat off her forehead. Where the hell are we now? Ethan checked the rearview mirror. His heart sank. The gas station. Still there. Still waiting. We never left. Lisa's breath hitched. That's not possible. Jake clenched his teeth. We've been driving for miles. Ethan's hands trembled. Then why are we still in the same damn place? Silence. Then a voice, low, soft, from the back seat. Maybe because you never left. The air turned to ice. Lisa's spine stiffened. Jake's foot slammed on the brakes. The van jerked to a stop. Ethan's throat went dry. They weren't alone. Slowly, too slowly, they turned. The back seat should have been empty. It wasn't. A passenger sat there. At first glance, it almost looked human. Almost. A woman. Long black hair, pale skin, dressed in something that looked like an old, rotting funeral gown. But her face was wrong. Her eyes were too deep. Her lips were stitched shut. And yet, they could still hear her voice. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, muffling a scream. Jake shook violently. His voice cracked. Who are you? The woman's head tilted. Bones cracked as she moved. Then, a whisper. I never left either. The air turned suffocating. Ethan's fingers dug into the seat. You're not real. The woman smiled. A grotesque, unnatural stretch of her stitched lips. Then, she opened her mouth. The stitches tore apart, skin ripping. A deep, gurgling moan crawled from her throat. Lisa choked back a sob. Then, in a voice that sounded like all of theirs at once, the woman spoke. You should have never stopped. Then, the lights flickered, the van shuddered, and the woman moved. Too fast, too inhuman. One moment she was in the back seat, the next she was between them. Ethan gasped. She was so close. Her skin reeked of decay. Her empty eyes stared through him. Then she reached out. Her fingers brushed his cheek. Cold, too cold. Ethan's body locked up. A voice slithered into his head, not spoken, whispered inside his skull. You never left the road. The road never left you. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. Lisa yanked him back, breaking the touch. Jake hit the gas. The van roared forward. But the woman, she didn't move. She just sat there, watching, waiting. And then she was gone, vanished, as if she had never been there. But Ethan knew. They all knew. She was still with them, somewhere. And the road was still endless. Chapter 11. The Vanishing Road. The van raced forward, tires screeching against the asphalt. The headlights carved a narrow path through the suffocating darkness, but the world outside felt thinner, less real, like a painting peeling away at the edges. Lisa sat curled up, clutching her wrist, the dark veins spreading up her arm like something alive. Her breath was ragged, her body trembling. Jake's eyes were locked on the road, his grip like a vice on the wheel. He didn't blink. He didn't dare. Sophia wiped sweat from her forehead. Is she gone? Ethan slowly turned his head, scanning the back seat. Empty. The woman was gone, but it didn't feel like she had left. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. She said we never left. Sophia's throat was dry. What does that mean? No one had an answer. Then, the van's engine coughed. Jake's stomach dropped. Ethan stiffened. What was that? Jake pressed the gas pedal harder, but the van slowed down. The speedometer plummeted. Lisa's breath hitched. Why are we stopping? Jake slammed the pedal down. The engine gasped, sputtered, died. The van rolled to a stop. The headlights flickered once, then darkness. No engine, no dashboard lights, no sound, nothing. Lisa let out a small, broken whisper. We're stuck. Outside, the world felt too still. The trees, the road, the sky. Everything seemed trapped in place, as if time had stopped. Ethan reached for his phone. Still no signal. Jake gritted his teeth. Try to restart the van. Sophia leaned forward, turning the key. Click, nothing. She tried again. Click, click. Still nothing. Then, the radio turned on. The static blasted through the van, loud and piercing. Everyone jumped. Sophia scrambled for the dial, twisting the volume down, but it didn't stop. Instead, the voices returned, soft at first, then clearer. Lisa's stomach knotted. They were their voices, laughing, talking, screaming. Ethan clenched his fists. No, 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 no. The static warped. The voices merged into one, a single distorted whisper. Look outside. Lisa's fingers dug into her seat. Jake's jaw tightened. No one moved. The whisper returned, louder. Look outside. Lisa shook her head. No. The windows frosted over. A heavy weight pressed against the van, like something was leaning against it. Then, knock, knock, knock. Lisa squeezed her eyes shut. Sophia bit her lip so hard it bled. Ethan turned, against every instinct screaming at him not to. His breath hitched. The window beside him was no longer fogged. It was clear, and someone was standing there. A shadow, tall, unmoving, no face, no features, just an emptiness shaped like a person. The whisper changed. It was no longer coming from the radio. It was coming from inside the van. Let us in. Lisa's heart pounded. She grabbed Ethan's wrist, her fingers digging into his skin. And don't open the door. Ethan couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. The van shook. The door unlocked. Click. Lisa's pulse spiked. Sophia lunged, grabbing the handle before it could open. No! The shadow outside tilted its head. Then, the road outside disappeared. Ethan gasped. The trees, the pavement, the sky, all gone. The van was floating in nothingness, an endless void, stretching in every direction. Lisa's voice cracked. We're not on the highway anymore. Sophia's hands shook. Jake's breath was shallow. Then, where the hell are we? Ethan stared out the window, his stomach twisting into knots. The shadow figure was still there, waiting. Then it smiled, and the van began to sink. Chapter 12. The Endless Road. The van sank into the void. No gravity, no direction, just falling. Lisa screamed. Sophia clutched the dashboard. her nails digging into the plastic. Jake yanked the wheel, but it spun freely, useless in his hands. Ethan reached for Lisa, but the space between them stretched unnaturally, like the van was warping, growing. The windshield showed nothing. No sky, no ground, no light, just endless black. Then they hit something, a sudden jarring stop, not like crashing, more like landing. The van lurched forward. The tires met a solid surface, but when Jake looked down at the dashboard, the engine was still dead. The headlights flickered once, then they saw it, a road, stretching endlessly in both directions. But it wasn't the highway. It was older, cracked, weathered asphalt, splitting apart like dry skin. The lines were faded, warped, twisting like veins. Ethan's throat tightened. Lisa swallowed hard. Where are we? Jake tried to start the van. Click. Nothing. Sophia glanced at the mirrors. Her face paled. The gas station. Ethan snapped his head up. What? Sophia pointed, and there it was. The gas station, right where it had always been, no matter how far they drove, no matter how fast. They had never left. Lisa covered her mouth. This isn't real. This isn't real. Ethan clenched his fists. We need to get out of the van. Jake's hands shook. Are you crazy? That thing, knock, knock, knock. Lisa choked back a sob. The sound came from the roof. Then the voices returned, not from the radio, not from outside, from inside the van. Lisa, Ethan, Sophia, Jake. They heard themselves, whispering, laughing, crying. Jake broke first. He reached for the door. Jake, no! Lisa lunged. Too late. The door swung open. Cold air rushed inside, and outside, the shadows were waiting. Not one, not two, hundreds, lining the broken road. Faceless, motionless, they had always been waiting. Jake staggered back, closed the door. The closest shadow stepped forward. Ethan grabbed Jake, pulling him away. Close it, close it. Lisa kicked the door, slamming it shut. To darkness. The van shook violently. The road outside rippled like water. Lisa clutched her head. The whispers, they were inside her skull now. You never left. You never left. You never left. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. No, no, no. This isn't real. Lisa whimpered. I don't want to die here. Then the road moved. Not the van. The road itself. It stretched forward, unraveling into infinity. Sophia gasped. It's showing us the way. Ethan didn't hesitate. Drive. Jake grabbed the key. He turned it. The engine roared to life. The headlights blazed forward. Jake slammed the gas. The van shot down the road. The shadows lunged. Hands clawed at the windows, the doors, the roof. Lisa screamed. Sophia prayed. Ethan held on. The speedometer climbed. The road narrowed, twisting. The van tilted, tires screaming. The gas station, right ahead. Lisa's breath hitched. It was different. The lights were on, and something stood at the entrance. A man, not a shadow, not a ghost. A man in a gas station uniform, waiting, watching. The road ended. Jake clenched his jaw. No brakes, no stopping. They hit the gas station, and everything went white. Lisa woke up first. She was in the van. The dashboard glowed softly. The headlights lit up an empty highway. No gas station, no shadows, just the road. Ethan groaned. Are we alive? Sophia wiped her tears. I think so. Jake exhaled. The van was running. The engine was purring softly, like nothing had ever happened. Lisa's hand shook as she reached for her wrist, the dark veins gone. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Jake shifted into drive. Let's go. before it changes its mind. Nobody argued. The van rolled forward. The road stretched ahead. And this time, the gas station never appeared again. But Ethan glanced at the rearview mirror, and for just a second, he saw her, sitting in the back seat, smiling